Hello and welcome to the Diversity Planning and Practice Summarise presentation. This presentation was provided to agencies in a Diversity Planning and Practice workshop. I am Carolina Valencia Coleman and I am the Diversity Advisor for the West Sector. My role is jointly funded by the federal government and the state government for the CHSP funding streams and the HACC-PYP funding streams. Before we start the presentation, I'd like to acknowledge that this presentation is being done on Wurundjeri land, and that I'd like to pay my respects to elders past and present, and that we recognise the impacts of colonisation. So the presentation is, like I mentioned, a summary presentation. I'll be providing information that will aid you in completing your diversity plan for the 2018-2019 planning cycle. So these are the areas that we looked at the workshop. What is diversity planning, why we do diversity planning, how we go about it, definitely who is required to submit the diversity plan, my role as a diversity advisor and how I can support you in completing this process, the National Aged Care Diversity Framework, which is key to this particular planning cycle because it is a new framework, and it's important that agencies familiarise themselves and link their plans back to the consumer outcomes that are outlined in this document. We go through a step-by-step process of what the diversity planning steps are, and we've simplified that down to 7 steps, and we talk about partnerships and collaborations, and we end with focusing on the consumer outcomes and some examples and lots of actions that will give you a really good tangible idea of how these consumer outcomes look in practice. So what is diversity planning? Diversity planning, as the slide suggests, is a strategic population planning initiative, and it supports and encourages services to deliver responsive and respectful services to their consumers, to their clients, with the thinking of the specific special characteristics that a person seeking services might have. These diversity characteristics are outlined in the CHSP program and manual, and also in the HACC manual. And it's important to remember that they are not in any way, those characteristics, any type of setback or barrier. In fact, this is part and parcel of everybody's diversity, and they should be seen as strengths, and it's really the system that we're looking to create flexibility and accessibility in. So why do we do diversity planning? Well, you can see from the slide that equality doesn't mean equity slide. It's really important to consider that we may all start at the same start line, but we definitely may not get to the finish line or get to the same goal without putting some special measures in place that will enable everybody to get to the goal they require. So really this process is looking at trying to achieve similarity and equality in the experience that the consumers are going to have in the service, and considering that some may experience privilege and others may not have the same access to that privilege due to their life experience or unique situations. Here is more specified reasons why we do diversity planning. It's definitely to ensure the human rights of our consumers are continuously protected, promoted, and when we have limitations in our service provision, that we can justify them when people are accessing our services. We want people, we want to be respectful and responsive to a person's diverse lifestyle and uniqueness and their needs that they present us with. We want to achieve equitable access to services. For those who face barriers to service access. And again, we're wanting to come from a strengths-based perspective that, everybody has, and, including ourselves, we have, much diversity within us. And we're looking at diversity within diversity at times as well. And so, it's a strength-based approach where we want to ensure that we can, create flexible systems. Successful planning is really about involving the whole of the organisation, and this includes your board members, managers, senior managers, coordinators, community care staff, volunteers. It involves everybody who can be a face of your organisation or a champion of your organisation, that they understand the importance of diversity planning. Now, we want to strengthen the capacity of funded organisations to deliver high-quality, inclusive services. In fact, all of this work does lead, and evidence suggests that it leads to better client outcomes and experience. And of course, it's an annual requirement of your funding agreement with the Department of Health and Department of Health and Human Services. And also, it links to the home care standards. So here is a slide that demonstrates the diversity characteristics for CHSP funding stream. You will see that these areas are what we call the diversity characteristics, or also the focus areas, and it is expected that you have at least 3 of these if you receive CHSP funding, and that is that you will cover 3 of these areas in your plan. Of course, it has to be comparable to the size of your organisation. The amount of funding you receive is how, ensuring that you are covering as many as you can and ensuring that it's realistic. So the minimum in this case is definitely 3. If you receive both HACC and CHSP funding, we want to ensure that you're covering diversity characteristics from both areas. So who's required to submit a diversity plan? Well, HACC-PYP providers and CHSP providers funded under the Victorian Home and Community Care Program. This includes providers that have transitioned into the full CHSP. So CHSP providers that were not previously Victorian HACC providers are encouraged to participate in this planning process, but however, it is not a requirement. So how do we do diversity planning? Well, we understand our target population, and this we do through looking at data, ABS data. We also can use anecdotal information as well that comes through our community communication channels. We then understand our own client population. So we look at our DEX and MDS data, and we look at what are the people that we are actually connecting with. We then look at both sets of data and we compare our external data that we've gathered around our focus area and also our own client information, and we identify the groups that are not accessing our services. These are the people that we want to target because they are not receiving our service. When we have we've completed this process, we then think about some of the barriers that this group of people might be experiencing that doesn't allow them to access our service. So here is where we do that self-reflective piece around how is it that we're engaging? How is it that we are communicating? Can we extend the way that we are connecting with the community? Can we broaden? Can we connect with other organisations? Can we create partnerships? Can we, consider translation of our documents? Can we have advisory groups that can provide us with better understanding as to why these people are not accessing our service. We then develop the action plan and we ensure that we link it back to the National Aged Care Diversity Framework consumer outcomes. So my role as a diversity advisor is to be your key contact in regarding to diversity planning and practice. I'm that conduit or that bridge. I support providers in the development and the implementation of their agency plan, diversity plan, and also I collate all of the plans coming up soon, and the deadline's not far away. On Friday the 14th of September, I will collate all of the themes that come up in the region and all the successes and the barriers, and contribute to a regional and statewide response, which will become the summary, which is also on our website, which is the purple document, which is last year's summary, and it's a great resource to look at because it'll give you an idea of what has occurred in the state, and to give you the language that we would like to use in your action plans, and also show you if you like sized organisations, what they've completed and how they've come about to making some of their actions successful. So I really highly recommend that you look at that document. And also we work with regional alliances and networks to facilitate these networks, and we create forums so that there's a better understanding of some of the themes in the regions. So here is the Walk With Us video. We use this in our workshops as a tool to understand cultural inclusion in the workplace in an organisation. What are some of the challenges? What are some of the advice that some organisations that have already gone through this path can give organisations, agencies that are just starting? And we have a link to this video on our website. So now I'm going to talk to you about the National Aged Care Diversity Framework. The vision for this framework is, all older people will experience a high-quality aged care system that ensures equitable access and outcomes and embraces their diverse characteristics and life experience. Here's in the next slide is the imperatives of the framework. So equity of access and outcome, empowering clients to use the services, inclusion, which ensures that all of the services that you are providing are inclusive and are not denying or limiting anyone. That there's a focus on quality improvement and continuous improvement into your organisation. That you are considering capacity building and looking at different ways, models, tools and audits to ensure that you're building the capacity of your workforce and your capacity to respond to client and consumer needs. And also that you are a responsive and accountable organisation, and that you are understanding some of the challenges and you can respond to them and also be accountable for the services that you're providing. So here is the Aged Care Diversity Framework and 6 outcomes for consumers. So this is really key to the writing of your plan, because once you pick your focus area, once you actually have that priority and outlined and the actions formulated, and you've gone through and done the measurable components of that, you then must link your action to one of these 6 outcomes for consumers. So making informed choices, adopting systematic approaches to planning and implementation, accessible care and support, supporting a proactive and flexible system, respectful and inclusive services, meeting the needs of the most vulnerable. So there is also another document that we've put on our website that summarises exactly what an agency or organisation must do in order to, meet each of these outcomes. So I highly recommend that you have a look at that, and it'll give you a much more surmised idea of what each of these outcomes really are aiming for organisations to do. So here is the diversity planning process. So number 1, we review our previous plan and we look for successes and any outstanding priorities. So which actions did not get completed and why? So, what limited us? What was difficult? Did the focus area change? Did, we lose staff in that area? So, that's something that you really want to have a good look at, how... was that particular action too ambitious? Was it too broad? Do we need to, look at it and break it down so that it's actually more achievable and measurable? So that's the first thing that you do. You have a look at the previous organisational plan. Then we look at collecting and reviewing population data. So we may already have an idea of the focus areas we want to look at when we look at our previous plan. So we might want to keep the focus area because we know we've got a lot of work to do with that particular diversity characteristic. Or we might choose some new ones. And if that's the case, we'll have a look for any information that is available externally. So definitely we want to go to look for that particular data. So here's a slide that it's a bit more information. It's certainly important that we if we've had any successes, how can we reapply this in other areas? And we want to ensure that we're not actually copying and pasting our previous plan and submitting that either, because it doesn't demonstrate any continuous improvement in your organisation. So in terms of collecting the data, here are some really useful websites. With the City of Greater Dandenong, if you go to that website, you'll see a great big breakdown of community Victorian data broken down by LGA. It's a great website to build and to gather information, and of course anything that's anecdotal that's coming from the community is also you can also use. So this particular slide is an example of some data that I think is relevant, especially for ethno-specific organisations. That if you're focusing on, say for instance, particularly here in the West sector, there's quite a large population of Italian communities, and so here this particular data which is looking at only 5 municipalities, but if you work across more, if you work across less, you simply pick your birthplace, you ensure that the lower age range is over 65, and here it tells us there are 7,542 Italian born people of that age group. So that's a really great, round, clear number that we can use if we want to focus on that particular community. I think the other important thing to mention about data is that it's a snapshot in time. Even though it says 2016, it is fairly recent, but not everybody completes the ABS data census. So these are some of the things that we need to take into account when we're using data, that it's not a completely accurate picture. That, if we're going to look at communities such as Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, or communities or groups of people that are homeless, those communities can at times be transient. So the data that comes up in the LGA ABS, may not be truly reflective. It might be a conservative figure, and in fact it might be quite much larger. So it's an indication point, it's a starting point, and it also provides evidence that the group of people that you're focusing exist, and that they're there and they require your services. So it's a very powerful piece of information, although at times not completely reflective of the picture on the ground. It's definitely a starting point, and once you master this capacity to be able to find this data, it can also be used in other areas where you might be looking to apply for grants or anything like that. But it's certainly an important component of this process, and this information goes in your data population plan. Here's another data example. So again, these data samples, the one that I'm using here on this slide is on the website. So we can see immediately that the highest groups of Hobson's Bay, Melton and City of Brimbank, we're looking at Vietnam, India, Philippines, India, New Zealand. So even in these, just looking at these three LGAs, we know that there's quite a substantial community of Indian born residents, and over 65. It's again, in terms of that particular community, it's telling us that it's a rather young community. So 500, 221, 100. So it's not you have about something like just under 1,000 elderly people. So, but then again, if you're working across all the LGAs in the West, that might be a sizable amount of people that you might want to consider as a group of people that you'd like to work with. So here's an example of the population template, and how some of the wording that you might want to use to fill it out. Here we have an example of the HACC-PYP and CHSP client data. So I guess the next step is that we want to compare, and we want to use internal data to compare with the external data to see where the gap is. So in relation to HACC-PYP and the MDS reports, you can pull up reports on the following topics, and the same with CHSP and DEX, you can pull up report on the following areas. Here's an example of HACC-PYP client data and what it might look. This is de-identified, and this is how the report would come up, and the link is to the actual channel to get this data is above in the blue. And in relation to DEX, the CHSP data, this is the information you require in order to be able to access it, and the links to access that data as well. So the next following slides are just examples of what the data source looked like. And I've put them up so that you're on the right track if you're looking and definitely going through these this website, this data source. So I'll just flick through them so that this is what it looks like, so you're on the right track. So this particular example is quite a useful one, because it's telling us financial vulnerability and with clients who are living in private rental, and if they are on the aged care pension. So it's telling us that if a client is living on the aged care pension, which we know is around and there's actually a data slide, some data that we've put on our website around financial disadvantage. We know that, say for instance in the LGA of Greenbank, somebody over 65 is going to be living off something like $381 a week. So that is really not going to take you very far. It might just pay your rent, which means that there's no food for living expenses. There's no money for living expenses. There's no money for food. They might be in severe food insecurity, and ultimately they might well be also at risk of homelessness. So that's the kind of information that we're wanting to surface, if you like, if you have got clients who are on the aged care pension and living in private rental, that they might well fall into homelessness. So now we are looking at, so before I leave the data piece, I wanted to also point out that there's been some work that HACC has done, so the Homeless Support Agency has done around vulnerable women and also communities at risk of homelessness. So I advise you to Google that and have a look at what work they've done, because that's a great example of being able to identify a group of people that they want to work with, going in and finding the data, then comparing it with their internal data, and then putting some actions into place that demonstrate that they have got a strategy to be able to increase the numbers that weren't otherwise accessing their service. In this particular example, HACC was able to move forward. They found all that information. They knew they didn't have very many referrals from culturally, linguistically diverse communities, and so what they did was they created bilingual staff, upskilled them to understand the housing system and how to support people who are at risk of homelessness, and then went out and provided this information to community groups in their language. And as a result of this project, they were able to increase their referrals by 375%. So that's a really clear impact that they have created, a really clear, tangible impact in terms of how they have supported a community that they were otherwise not having any access to. So now this is an example of the population planning template and completely filled out, and how they've identified the gaps and the barriers. So when we are creating our priorities and actions based on these gaps, this slide really outlines the sort of three areas of action writing. So we identify the priority in which the focus area of the diversity characteristic that you want to work in, and it really should describe the challenge or the issue that you want to address. The action that you write out must specifically outline what you will be doing to achieve or address progress in this priority. And it should be tangible and contribute to achieving your identified aim. You measure the success, your measures of success need to detail the evaluation indicators you will use to demonstrate that the action has been completed and what difference it made. So I will go through that a little bit clearer now in this slide. So you'll see the SMART goals picture, and this is really important in terms of when you are writing your action, that you're really clear about how specific and how measurable, how attainable and how relevant and how timely. So, in terms of how specific, you might start with quite a broad action. So this will help you, who is actually involved, what do you want to accomplish, where will you do it, why are you doing this, which constraints are you, or requirements do you have? So that really hones it down. You're really, really clear about what you're going to achieve. Then the next one is it measurable? Can you track the progress and the measures and the outcomes? How much, how many, how will I know when my goal is actually accomplished? So that gives you a little idea of where it is that you're heading. And in fact, that's really important, because when you look back and you do a review, you'll be able to say immediately whether you were successful or not. I think the next one, attainable or achievable, is really important and must be comparative to the size of your organisation and the amount of funding that you receive. So in terms of attainability, you may be quite a small ethno-specific organisation. You might only have a few people and some volunteers. So you want to ensure that whatever actions and priorities you pick, they are going to be achievable for your organisation. And this is where, rather than having a very ambitious plan, you might have something that's very, very specific, but it is creating building blocks. And it's creating steps and taking you in the direction of continuous improvement and evolving as an organisation in growth and in capacity building and diversity. And so that's how we will be looking at the plans. Alternatively, if you're a very large organisation like a council or a large community health, then you need to demonstrate focus areas and actions and priorities that are comparative to the amount of money that you receive to deliver this work. So we would be expecting a much more detailed plan and bigger actions. So the other thing, when you're looking at the action, is it relevant? You have to ensure you might have a great partnership with another organisation, but if it's not relevant to the funding stream, over 65, and also if you receive HACC, then it's not, that particular partnership won't count. So it must be relevant to the action at hand and the consumers at hand. And is it timely? So how long will this particular action take? Is this going to take a whole year, or can this be done in 3 months? There are actions that you can bring from 1 year to the next, and importantly, that particular process can be done a few, 1 year or 2 years, I think is acceptable. But once you start to recycle a particular action, I think it's important to move on. So in terms of the diversity template, it's really important that you do not merge cells or you leave any blank cells at all. We will be extracting data from these plans that you send us, and we need to ensure that all the cells are completed and the rest of the information is there for your reading. So this is an example of a particular plan. It's important that these actions are not copied, and it's just here for your information so that you get a sense of what a completed plan looks like. And you will see that on the first column is the links back to the actual consumer outcomes that we talked about earlier, and all the other areas have been filled out. Of course, the little optional star is only for those that have HACC-PYP, and if you still want to link, I think it's a best practice idea that if you are being able to link that information back to something broader. So here are some of the actual consumer outcomes in some examples of the actions of what they might look like and the partnerships. So I just want you to know that in relation to measurables, the measurable areas that we'll be looking at will be how many partnerships have organisations formed, how many policies and procedures have been developed or not necessarily developed, but will be developed and put into place to improve inclusivity and improve service provision. In terms of continuity of service and connecting consumers into the sector, how are organisations and agencies doing that? Service improvement, tools and coordination, making services accessible and seamless. We want to know how agencies are wanting to improve their service. What tools are they using? How are they coordinating? How are they demonstrating flexibility? And how are they ensuring that that consumers can access them, that they're easy to access, and that they have service continuity? We want to see how you are, developing your workforce and what kind of training you're putting into place. And we want to know how that is impacting the end product, if you like, and the consumer experience. We want to know how training is actually improving your capacity as an organisation to provide inclusive services. And, so we also want to know how you are reaching out to other organisations in the sector that have actually commenced this work as well. So that's already another, example of partnerships. And don't forget that the diversity report from last year is a really good aid to help you, think more about action. So I'm going to go through these slides quite quickly. So making informed choices, it's older people have easily accessible information about the aged care system. In this case, the action is providing information in an appropriate format in a language that consumers understand. So the example here is using my aged care information and providing it on an ethnic radio station, and the partnership is with EC SCCV, the Speak My Language radio program. The next is adopting a systemic approaches to planning and implementation, and the action is engaging consumers in a culturally safe and supportive environment that needs them to be enables them to be active partners and to articulate their needs. And the particular action that's suggested here is a consumer-led advisory group, an LGBTI focus, and that you as an agency will be able to hear from your LGBTI consumers and better understand their needs. And here the partnership with the peak body, Val's Cafe, that's focused very much on over 65 LGBTI consumers. Accessible caring support. So the action here is to collaborate with stakeholders to identify and overcome barriers in accessing the aged care system. The example is actually staff training on care levers and better understanding this particular focus area. And what will happen is that the people that do the assessment within your agency will understand some of the barriers to data collection for care leavers and look at what might be put in place in order to help better understand this focus area and this client group and create a safe space for disclosure. And the partnership here is with Open Place and Connecting Home. Number 4 is supporting a proactive and flexible system. The action is to engage with local community and stakeholders to identify emerging needs and how service delivery models can be adapted to embrace those needs. So this is all about flexibility and engaging with your community and with stakeholders that will give you a better understanding of what consumers need. And here the example is a clinic that's focused on Arabic and Assyrian and Chaldean speaking consumers, and it's a drop-in clinic. So basically, they've been able to bring in interpreters to do trilingual interpreting for for 3 of these communities, so that people can access the services on that particular time. And rather than asking clients to adapt to your system and your booking system, it's like changing your system to ensure that the consumer has their needs met. So it's always about the consumer being in the center and us supporting them. So number 5 is respectful and inclusive services. The action here is to seek out and develop and use tools, training and information that supports delivery of care that is inclusive of diverse characteristics and life experiences. So here the action or the example action is a dementia-friendly training to all community care staff, dementia-friendly checklist and spaces developed in all CHSP and HACC-PYP social support programs. It's also about embedding diversity into their staff performance appraisals and regular supervision and team meetings, so that the diversity as a topic is alive and constantly discussed. Embedding it into regular supervision. You can also embed it into your HR systems as well, and look into changing recruitment practices, for instance, as well. Meeting the needs of the most vulnerable. So older people, the action here is provide inclusive models to address the needs of the most vulnerable and work with other stakeholders to ensure the full spectrum of needs are met. So here it's looking at cultural safety and inclusive server policy in partnership with Centre for Culture, Ethnicity and Ageing. It might be a cultural safety audit. It might be considering the rainbow tick. It might be considering looking at trauma-informed care or training for staff to better understand trauma, and the fact that a lot of the focus areas are groups of people who may have experienced trauma and could really benefit from services that understand their needs and understand the importance of a safe environment to be able to disclose this information. Also, it upskills staff to better understand how to work with disclosure of vulnerable, where people feel quite vulnerable. Also helps them better understand things around privacy and confidentiality and how to manage this sensitive information so people remain feeling safe and continue accessing your service. And here this slide is the purpose of this progress review section in your template, which is green. So please don't fill this out. This area is just for you to put information about your actions after September 14 as you go along. Place information in there that relates back to your progress. It's a way of keeping, this is, I guess, a live recording, I guess, of your information so that it's present and you are tracking. And when it comes to review time, you're able to just bring this back up and send it to us when it's requested. So, do you have any questions? Well, you can send them to me, please do. Importantly, we need all plans sent to the email on this screen, so wmsdtadmin@cohealth.org.au. The reason why we would like you to send out the plans to this email is that we will be collating them all, and we don't want them to, any plans to get lost, and so therefore we'd like one central place for our plans to arrive. We would really appreciate any questions that you might have. We still have 1 week. Submission of plans are required on the 14th of September, which is the Friday week from today. If you would like to send through a draft plan, you are more than welcome to do so, and we will send that straight back to you. Like I mentioned, my name is Carolina Valencia Coleman, and I am your diversity advisor for the West Metro Sector Development Team. And thank you so much for listening to this summarised presentation that was delivered to agencies this past week workshop. And I wish you the best with your plan, and I hope that it is successful. Thank you.